Welcome, and we're very excited to have you join our program today. Just a few reminders before we get started. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available afterward on demand. We will also email you a link to your inbox after we conclude today's live program. We also invite you to please join us in the chat today. Tell us where you're tuning in from, a little bit about what your understanding of the topic is. We want to hear and engage with you. We also invite you to send your questions to our speaker panel today at the Q&A section on the right side of your screen. And then we also have some great handouts available, and our speakers today have also provided their LinkedIns if you wish to connect with them afterward. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get today's topic started. How Visa Cross-Border Solutions reduces outages and testing system resilience in the SDLC. This is going to be an interesting topic, especially with the financial services industry. So I am so excited to have our speakers here from Gremlin. And thank you again, Gremlin, for sponsoring. And let's go ahead and have some introductions. Andre, would you like to get us started with that?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that warm-up, Amanda. So hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Newman. I'm a Senior Reliability Specialist here at Gremlin. I'm joined by Chris Kempster, Senior Non-Functional Test Engineer at Visa Cross-Border Solutions. Also, Dan Muret, Senior Solutions Architect, also here at Gremlin. Chris is going to walk us through his journey of improving reliability and reducing outages. And Dan is going to show us a live demo of some of the solutions that Chris implemented. So without further ado, I will jump into the agenda. So a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll start by looking at the problem leading up to this project. What challenges was Chris's team facing? Why did they choose resilience testing specifically? And what results were they hoping to get from this? Next, we'll see how he actually implemented this. First, with Chris talking about his processes, and then Dan will show a live demo of a similar implementation. And lastly, we'll save around 15 minutes at the end for open Q&A. If you came with questions or if a question comes up during the webinar, please feel free to leave them into the Q&A panel, and we'll get to them after the presentation. Also, like Amanda said, if you just want to say hi, let us know where you're coming from and what brought you to the session, feel free to go to that chat panel and leave a message there as well. So what was the motivation behind this initiative? Well, Chris's team was already running QA tests and had robust observability in place. So the question would come up of, why would you add more testing on top of that? And the reason is that despite the testing they were already doing, they're only catching some issues after they'd already caused a production incident. So even with QA and observability, there's still this sort of gap in testing coverage. And while it might not seem like a huge gap at first, it is big enough for reliability risks to bubble up through, and those can result in outages. So some of those risks include things like dependencies that their service is connected to that they might not have been aware of or that weren't documented, auto-scaling rules that weren't configured properly or that weren't optimal for their systems that didn't have working redundancies in place, meaning there was nothing to fail over to in case they had an issue. Of course, one-off hacks and fixes and little tweaks in production that might not have gotten documented, which of course makes it hard, if not impossible, to reproduce them. And architecture that doesn't meet compliance standards, which of course can cause all kinds of unexpected behaviors, both technically and on the business side. And so to bridge this gap, Chris and his team turned to chaos engineering and resilience testing. And these really helped uncover these sorts of risks, which in turn prevented those outages and improved developer efficiency. But chaos engineering is kind of a broad topic. So what exactly does that entail? So by running these tests, they were able to uncover issues related to failing over between zones, auto-scaling, misconfigurations of environments, and unknown or unreliable dependencies. And best of all, because of how they set up their staging environment, they were able to uncover and address these issues before they had a chance to reach production. So now I hand it over to Chris to talk about his approach and his implementation. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you. Hi, guys. I'm Chris Kempster. I'm a Senior Non-Functional Test Engineer for Visa Cross-Border Solutions. And I'll walk you through how we achieved where we are today. Hopefully get you guys more interested or trying to do it yourselves within your teams, within your companies. Go to the next slide, Andre, please. Cool. So 4 years ago, we only had standard QA testing practices, and Cozy Cloud had a new CTO who wanted to apply all of these chaos engineering practices, have more rigid performance testing, do more testing, look at our reliability, how we stand up for our clients. So we introduced a new function called the non-functional test function, and we started our journey from there. The team, we just spent a lot of time analyzing what the services looked like. We were given the staging environment, which was our first production sort of like environment, and compared that with production, the traffic, the throughput, and seeing how do we mimic that in this environment. Once we had that in place with our load tooling, doing that, we started to then introduce the chaos engineering side of it, the experiments, which was a tricky thing to introduce to a company the size we are. The environment staging we had was path to production, but a very small environment. And if we broke that environment, we'd be breaking and upsetting a lot of teams trying to promote. So we also, before we did our first game day, or we even installed Gremlin in the environment, we identified scope. We had to look at what would we do first, how can we introduce this to teams in a nice way, and not make it scary for them, which is, I think, the initial thoughts were, oh, this is going to cause us problems, this is going to be disruptive. So how do we attack that? And we introduced FMEA, failure mode effect analysis, to kind of warm everyone up, let's say. So we had meetings with each development team and got them to analyze their services with this kind of practice, defining, telling us what their dependencies are, what would happen if they had an outage, a loss of traffic, a connection to a database, what other service they care about, what would happen, obviously to the scoring, but also and how to mitigate it or improvements. So we did that, introduced that, rolled it out across the whole development world. We also tried to put that onus on the team to own. This was key. So it wasn't just us to meet with everyone and run the experiment or run them through it. We handed that over to them and give the ownership on them to care about their services, give them the score, be obsessed about it, understand, and help them understand more about their services and what could go wrong. So we had that all documented, and that basically started building out us test cases or experiments we could execute as a team with Gremlin in our staging environment to start testing those scores or testing those theories, or actually finding out what would happen. In some cases it was a guess, let's say. So that in mind, we did our first game day very soon, more or less a couple of weeks in. We did a company or tech-wide game day. We had the whole tech unit on a call, and we did it with everyone involved to kind of get everyone seeing it happen, everyone engaged, and break the ice with it. So we keep a Friday morning every week. We have a game day slot. I hope you're all familiar with game days. If not, we can talk about that after. We have Fridays to a license to blow up the environment or take down, drop connections to databases, etc. Use Gremlin to the max. So we did that, and as a tech org, we sat on a call when we analyzed it, and people spoke up or raised hands to how do we fix it, what happened, how do we identify what happened, how observant was it. And from that point on, we did one every week, and that's how we broke the ice and got started. It was difficult to start, to get people used to it. We'd run every game day as an incident. We'd create the failure, and then we'd obviously use another tool we have to create incidents, bring the teams into a channel. Let's run through the incident, and that was a challenge to start with, but we got there in the end. So we had teams excited to see who's going to get dragged in on a Friday, and that was the very start of our journey. So we did start to pick on FMEA sheets and pick out scenarios, or we'd be reacting to maybe an incident that's happened and retesting that. But we weren't really using Gremlin to the max. Our usage was very, very low. We had this full suite of capabilities, and we were probably using maybe 10%. We're doing black holes, tax, and just doing that because we couldn't get good results or in some ways mimic production instance, because the environment staging was okay. It was a prod-like environment, but it wasn't scaled up to the same size. It wasn't representative of have parity with prod. So where we'd have maybe one replica of both services, prod had 3. Or so one of the big things we did going forward, or to get it more prod-like, rather than having the feedback from a team saying, well, this isn't like prod, this wouldn't happen in prod, we made the staging environment scale up to the same size as production, same RDS instances, same size, down to everything the same. So then obviously those conversations we used to have. And then we started to introduce a more aggressive way of testing the services. So when we started to introduce HPA, Canary, more resilience mechanisms, and we needed to make sure we could test them, help out testing them, but also test them in anger and do it on a weekly basis or as often as we required. Yeah, can you go to the next slide, please, Sandri? Cool. So Gremlin has the reliability scoring feature, and that was a quick win for us to introduce a standardized way of running tests in our environment for every service, every team, every domain, and reporting that back, and start to create scoring for each team. We started with a full-blown recommended suite from Gremlin, or the Gremlin recommends, I think it might be, which is probably the most verbose, aggressive test suite. So it would encompass testing scaling with memory, CPU. It would analyze the risks, Kubernetes best practices, like how well you spread across availability zones, etc. And then dependencies, so latency, black hole on every dependency. We've got a mesh, so Gremlin finds what you're talking to through the mesh and lists them all. So it was very, very aggressive, but we found after maybe introducing the services to this and running them through that suite, the results were very different for service to service. We expect them to be more or less the same for a number of reasons, down to our internal infrastructure, how our services behave. So we were looking for a way to make that result accurate, believable, and trust, basically. So we could report that back to dev teams, have them interested in it, have conversations around it, raise tickets, etc. We spent a lot of time customizing our test suite and standardizing it so it would work for everyone, and everyone, like, we could be confident service to service that our score was true. We even queried, we asked Gremlin, how do we trust that you're giving us that score? Like, do we agree with that? You're telling us it's something, we're going to say we don't agree. And in that case, then we could customize the suite. We could remove what wasn't relevant. The example I'll give here, one of the risks it checks for is application version conformity. Is it? I can't remember, Dan. But
uniformity. Yeah.
So that would always apply for us because we have Canary and it doesn't quite pick it up. So we were able to remove or fine tune the test suite to what worked for us, right? But also believe in that and why are we doing that? We asked a lot of questions of Gremlin through this process to understand this score. If we're going to be giving it to people and understand it, then we need to be confident in it too. So then we just kept trimming back the test suite until we had something more repeatable, and we started to run these tests for, I think we had 15 services. We did a baseline for 3 nights a week. Over 12 hours, we'd be calling the Gremlin API to initiate the tests with the service IDs and let them run. During this, we had our background load on, and we were monitoring. We've got the health checks in Gremlin via Datadog linked, so they'd be failing the service if those breach. And still, we were finding little issues here or there. But that was because stuff changes. We had challenges with the environment again. Our infrastructure changed during it, but this was a good thing. But we were looking at these scores and why they're different, and trying to report that when we had thwe challenges, our infrastructure changing, upgrades, nodes changes. This actually helped us find issues when we were running these tests and get them fixed, right? We had this standardized test suite. We still got it now. It runs on an automated schedule. We got to a point with doing game days where we were running out of ideas, or not ideas, but things to look at. We introduced HPA, so we couldn't just saturate CPU and memory so easily. We had to start looking for FMEA scenarios which were not as visible, or try and make them not as visible. So with that, we had to I've lost it. We had to basically keep customizing our test suite, make it repeatable, and people were starting to get obsessed about doing it themselves. We were having requests for people to do game days, and we were like, well, that's not how it works, really. We we do it, we don't tell anyone. So we've got teams coming at us saying, we need to test our resilience scenarios before we go to prod. We're at that point now. Okay, it's taken a long time, 4 years, but we changed the way of thinking about doing this because it's very visible, it's in your face, and they care about it a lot more, to a point where we've actually started to shift left that process and move them away from the staging environment and run them on a pull request, an ephemeral namespace. They can make a change. A PR namespace comes up with the services. They either on a schedule test those resiliencies, but maybe a black hole tests, normally dependency tests, or they do them on every pull request. So we've actually got a goal to standardize that in people's pull requests. So before going to staging and doing it there, where you might already be in prod, you've actually you're confident in that change at that point. Yeah, I think that's that. Next slide, please. Process and setup. Yeah, next one, please, Andre. So this is the key thing about doing this, having confidence in the environment we're doing this testing in, to avoid feedback like this isn't production. So we made it the staging environment production. We took ownership of it as well, built it up so we could replicate production issues, remove false positive, and also have people trust that exercise we did. Forget that it's Gremlin we did it with. Stop thinking Gremlin would have done this, so I'm going to think about that. Have people look at it as an incident. Start treating the environment as if it was production. Have a monitoring alert and care about that environment if it's going wrong, because it's obviously valid. There's load on through it all day. There's synthetic tests running. If those things go wrong, you should probably care a bit more. We had that, so not just the development teams, but like the infrastructure team, the developer experience team, anyone that had ownership in the tool in that environment, we had to get them to care more. We had Datadog is obviously our monitoring and alerting tool, so we heavily integrated Gremlin with that, so we get failure notifications around the environment or during the tests, but also we're pumping them into a Slack channel to tell people about it. That environment, so we have our tests. I used Jenkins to automate the flow. We apply load with our tool and background for the whole duration of these test suites, or if we do a game day, any exercise, production volume, as it would be a peak time, and then trigger the experiments. Otherwise, sometimes the experiments are not really valid. You always want traffic on for these kind of things. We did that. We put on a cron schedule to do this resilience testing, so we don't have to worry about it. We just look at what happens. We were in a place where we had to kind of ask for permission from each team, let's say, when we were going to do this. But now they know it's going to happen, and we're not going to upset people. And that was quite a big, important change, not only in the environment but for the teams using that environment. A way of working we took a long time to change. Get rid of the fear of chaos engineering. Don't think of it as chaos. Think of it as what's a better word? Reliability. So yeah, changing the attitude was quite a challenge, but quite fun almost. Not hate the NFT team was a big one. Not be upset by us. That was a culture change as well. I don't like saying culture, but a way of working in that environment completely changed. That took a long time, but it's how we got to where we are today, to the point where people now want to do it in the pull request pipelines, where they've got more testing, they've got a smaller environment, they've got less to work with. And that's it, I think. Andre, next slide. Yes, so we have an automated test suite which is running these unscheduled cron jobs. We chose not to use the Gremlin cron schedule, so we wanted more control about when and how, mainly because there's a time zone difference. The Gremlin reporting tells us about the detected risks, gives us a score for that service, keeps a trend. We try to keep the engineering managers and the teams engaged with that score. We'd like to move it to a production readiness score eventually. That's what we're working towards at the minute, the production readiness scoring. Reports we try to give out, but we trust the teams to champion their FMEA, know what their risks are, and kind of review those, any feature change maybe, or any new dependencies, review them periodically, and be excited to read, take the tickets from that FMEA sheet and address them sooner. And that is it. Thank you. Okay. So I mentioned this already. There's the cultural changes. It didn't happen overnight, right? There's difficult conversations. There was nice conversations. There was upset. We didn't just test microservices. This was an environment where everyone's involved. Like I said, like the infrastructure team. We even went down to core Cube, DNS, core DNS, and took that out. And that incident, something quite nasty, down to our Jenkins itself. How if we can't promote services, or Jenkins or our tooling goes to promote and CI/CD stuff, that's still a problem. Maybe our clients are happy, but we can't make any changes. And, that's a problem in itself. Your resiliency testing, your tooling, any kind of, if you've got Canary, you've got an orchestrator of that. You might have an operator for certain things. We could resilience test Gremlin itself. And that culture change took a long time, especially for more older teams, or teams that were kind of working on legacy services. That was difficult to do. New teams, a lot easier. But we're at a really good place now. I'm quite proud of where we are, how the team has got to where we are today. Shifting left to a namespace on a pull request was huge for us, and that's continuing to grow within the company today. And that's the end for me. Thank you, guys. I'm going to hand over to Dan, the Gremlin, to do a demo.
Yeah, well, I'm sure my screen, Chris, there is a question in the chat if you want to take a peek at it and maybe share your thoughts.
The question from Richard H. Can you go into a bit more detail how you validate application? Okay, so we have health checks within Gremlin. We create monitors within Datadog. The integration is already there, provided by Gremlin, so we've got that integration set up. We create monitors. We've got a standardized set of monitors we create or use for every service. They have the same monitor, or it used to be called golden signals, I think. But we've got a standardized approach for our monitoring to use. We've got a standardized test suite, so we need to have standardized monitoring. We can't have it different. So when we create, when you create a service and you run, to even create the service and have it run, you have to set up the health checks. So that's a link to our monitor, and it's constantly polling that monitor. If that monitor you breach a threshold, it fails, it stops the test. So that's how we find out what happened. Next day we'll look at Datadog and what happened during the test time. I hope that answers the question. So we don't, the pipeline, we don't check our Jenkins CI/CD. We don't look at that. That is purely an orchestrator for turn on the load, calling the Gremlin API. What we care about, it was in Gremlin itself and its reporting and our health checks within Datadog.
Interesting. I'll show the health checks briefly too as we kind of walk through this. So what I kind of did is, in working with Chris over the last 3-4 years on this path and journey, kind of mirrored a little bit of what they've set up. So the Gremlin recommended tests. So if you're familiar with kind of how Gremlin works, or maybe not. So we'll start at a little bit higher level. Gremlin allows you to add your services. So it could be your entire application, could be part of your application. Really depends on what level and how granular you want to get with your reliability testing. This allows you to add things like, for example, a front-end service. This is like a simple retail application that I have set up here. So I have my front-end service, for example. So this is my main, front-end website for my retail application. This allows us to define a set of tests to run. So yes, there's a Gremlin recommended test that'll run memory, CPU. It'll do zone and host failovers. It does a lot of detected risk that may be in the environment, right? So you've got image pool, crash loop backoffs. You have memory limits set, all that kind of good stuff. So the recommended test from Gremlin is pretty comprehensive. I mean, it's really made to be kind of that high end of the maturity in reliability engineering. But what Chris and the team really found was it didn't necessarily fit in their environment. There was a lot of false positives, that sort of thing, that didn't add a ton of value. So when we launched the test suites functionality and being able to customize this test, they were able to really kind of customize this in a way that became more meaningful for them. So that's kind of what I've set up here. Real quick, kind of to Richard's question, when you define a service, you tie into a health check. So currently on this one, I've got these intelligent health checks. So this is actually mapped to my AWS account. This is an EKS cluster. So I'm looking at my load balancer metrics basically through AWS CloudWatch. And we do some comparison or intelligence around those CloudWatch metrics on that load balancer, latency, error rate, request rates, see where you're at. We add a threshold based on where you're at currently. As you run the test, if you cross that threshold, it will fail the test and roll those changes back. Very similar, you can set up any health check. So this is really where Chris and the Visa team is using Datadog. Is you integrate into Datadog, you tie the service monitors to the service inside of Gremlin, and then we'll pull those every few seconds to make sure that service stays healthy, doesn't breach those thresholds. So it gives you a little bit of a safety mechanism for this as well. So, this is really kind of what Chris and the team has done. If we take a look at, I'll pull up, this is the test suite that I'm running currently. So this is the one that I customized kind of for this webinar to be able to show, right, I'm just running, memory and a CPU test against the service, and then just a latency test on my dependencies. So I'm not going to go out and, block or, completely sever network traffic to any dependencies. I just want to see what happens if they're slow. Now I can, manually go out and do these tests. If I want to experiment and say, what happens if I can't connect to my database, I can still go do that easily enough. But on a scheduled basis, I just want a baseline that the basic functionality is there. And then as we reach those, we can raise that bar. We can adjust this test suite. We can add more risk. We can define more tests into the test suite, and those will all automatically be ran. So with that in mind, so, Chris mentioned that they run this all from an external scheduler. So, kind of to illustrate that a little bit, they're calling load gen tools, and then they're calling Gremlin. You can definitely use Gremlin for that as well. You can go into integrations, for example. You can tie in your load generators here. So you can tie into K6 or whatever load tool you're using. We'll make that API call for you. But a lot of customers choose to have a little bit more control over that and run it through an external scheduler. So it really doesn't matter, what scheduling system you use, as long as it's really set up and scheduled in an automated or an automated fashion, that really adds a lot of value. So to kind of illustrate this, right, I've got basically, I just did a screenshot, so I don't have to switch windows that I'm sharing here. You can do a curl. You can just do an API call to our API, pass it your service ID, team ID, all that good stuff, and this will kick this test off. So just here on the side, I'll run this off. We'll see this kick in here in just a second. And so that completed. And so we can see just by running the curl, I just ran it via Postman on a separate window, but we can see that it kicked off the test. So this is going to run basically what we call a baseline. That's going to run through, and it'll run all these tests over the next, 15, 30 minutes. So this just, it's a very simple way to really kind of show the different ways you can use Gremlin. So, the thought that I had when Chris was talking through this is, reliability engineering is not necessarily about the tools. Gremlin is very simple to install. It works very well. It's really more of a cultural change, getting your teams on board, getting them over the feeling of, we're not coming out to criticize your code or anything like that. We're doing the functional testing of, yes, your deployments do what they're supposed to do, but really the top layer of that is making sure that it is reliable. So when you do put it in that production environment, and you have pod restarts and you have all these other things potentially going on in the infrastructure, we want to make sure that they're resilient, right? So it's more that cultural shift and getting people comfortable with this level of testing that is really the harder piece to accomplish. So with that, I think we can open it up for Q&A. I think there's been a couple in there.
To demo, sorry. One thing we noticed with this that made this really awesome to use is being able to customize each scenario, each down that level. The standard was almost too hard for us. So the memory test is running now, there's a delay between them, right? We customized to a point where we needed a bigger delay or a delay at the end because we have HBA and we need to wait for stuff to go up and down, and that was huge for us. And Dan helped us facilitate that. So I got that.
Yep. Yeah, that's that's specifically what this test is. Chris and I were just working on that last week, and so I did a quick test on my side to make sure that works, but that's what the CPU with delay is. Basically, all I'm doing is adding a 5-minute delay after the CPU test, gives the deployment time to scale back down to the normal size. It just makes the testing of the dependencies go smoother. So that's kind of why this one has a little bit different name. This is just some of the validation that I was doing with Chris last week. And while people are throwing questions in, I can show real quick the recommended test, so we can kind of compare that to what we showed for Chris. So the Visa team is using primarily this memory test, CPU test, and just the latency test. The kind of the default test for Gremlin is to do host failure or container restarts. It's going to do zone failure, so we'll look at the zone tags if you're in a cloud environment, or you can set these up, even manually if you're on an on-prem environment. That allows us to simulate a zone failure. So, what happens if a zone in your region in AWS goes down? How does your application and thing handle that? Does that cause an outage because that's where your RDS lives? That sort of thing. So, some of these tests are really great. Some of them may be a little too much for your environment or may not be completely applicable to your environment, but that's really why we have the ability to customize these test suites and do this. Other things we can do for dependency, certificate expiration, failure tests, we're running a black hole. So those things that we see as a dependency for your application will actually block the network traffic to simulate a failure of those. So those are some things that you can absolutely do. And this is the default test. And then real quick, the risks. These are all the different risks that you could have. But in Chris's case, they were using canary deployment, so the application version uniformity was always one that was on and off, because we had a canary deployment that was the next version that was a different version than everything else. So it was kind of almost a false positive. So that was one that they removed. So modifying this is as easy as clicking this, moving it over to the risk that will be ignored category, and then that adjusts the test suites and stuff that we check for here. So it cleans this up, so you get a nice clean view of where your reliability status is.
That is great. Thank you, Dan, for sharing. If anybody has any questions, we're going to go ahead and save some time now for some Q&A. Feel free you can drop your question in the public chat, or you can drop it over in the Q&A panel. If you've got questions, ask them. This was an interesting topic. I don't really have any questions for once.
So we did actually have one come through.
Yeah.
And this is one that I can actually answer, nothing to you guys. There's a question about, is there any documentation on Gremlin running chaos against the AWS RDS, which is AWS's database service, like a network delay? Like, for example, simulating an app having network issues and communicating with the database. We actually do have a tutorial posted on the Gremlin website. If I can remember how to share my screen.
Just put it in the chat as well, Andre.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Essentially, it talks about how to run a chaos engineering experiment to create that sort of network latency or even a network outage between your systems. That could be like an EC2 host or something, or Kubernetes instance or pod or whatever it might be, and RDS. So you would be simulating what would happen if RDS had latency, or if it went down, or if your network connection became unavailable. So you can use that link that Dan posted to go check that out. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, that's good. We do have a question in the chat. It says, how to integrate with JMeter scripts, but how can you integrate all this with JMeter scripts?
Yeah, so JMeter is just another load gen tool, right? So you can do this a couple of different ways. You can do this similar to how Chris and the Visa team does this, and orchestrate this all from your external scheduler. So this could all be done through Jenkins. But inside of Gremlin, you can also come into, let's see, I can't edit my front end because the tester is still running. So we'll look at like cart service, for example, here. So if you go into integrations here, here's the where you can tie in load generators. So you set up your test in JMeter. So you're going to simulate 100, 200 users, whatever, right? You add, this would be, JMeter would be an other. Then we give you a form, right? So this would be JMeter 100 users type of a thing. And then you add in, basically it's an API to JMeter that would begin the load gen. So if you configure this, and again, in our documentation, we have a video that kind of walks you through in a little bit more detail than we can go into here. But this allows you to tie in that the load generator URL, and then anytime you run the test suite inside of Gremlin, we will run that API first. So we'll call out and we'll make the load gen start. Then we'll run through the different tests that you have configured, and then at the end we'll be able to stop that as well. So that's one way to integrate it. The other way is to basically just script this all, through an external scheduler using the APIs.
That is great. Okay. We've still got some questions here.
Yep.
Let's see. I don't see any yet, but let's give it maybe another minute if anybody wants to ask any more questions. Now is the time to do so. If you're interested in the product, if you're interested in the topic, especially financial services sector, there's a lot going on in that space. So any kind of solutions that can help instead of hinder are so valuable and important right now, for sure.
Yeah.
One question come in before I get to that. I'm going to second what Amanda says. It's rare that you get a chance to talk to somebody who's been working with this in the financial industry sector. So definitely, I don't use the word take advantage of that, but it kind of is, while you're here, while Chris is here.
Absolutely.
Definitely ask that. So we had a question come in about, sometimes we don't want to attack virtual machines or pods infrastructure, but maybe JVMs. We actually do support that. We have a product called Failure Flags, which is application level fault injection. What that means is that what you can do is you can enter essentially like a breakpoint in your code, your application code, where you can call a chaos engineering experiment. So you can inject an exception, you can add latency. We recommend putting these before calls to external dependencies specifically. So like if you want to simulate an RDS outage, you can put a failure flag right before your database call, and that way you're able to add latency or create an exception there. In the case of JVMs, I don't believe we can target the virtual machine itself, but we do support Java as a language. So you can put a failure flag in your Java code.
I don't know on that one. There is a process. You can attack the process, can't you? I think that's probably about it. It's quite verbose. We've done some stuff on the JVM. I can't remember what, but I think there is a way you can do something. I'll try and remember it if I can.
And kind of on that thought, Andre, I believe the office hours that we host later in October is going to be talking about failure flags specifically. So that application level fault injection. So that's just gremlin.com/office hours. So you can sign up for that. It's October 10th. So it's just a week or so away. So that's a session where we'll deep dive more into some of that application level fault injection piece as well.
Great. Okay, well, I've also got a couple more questions, it looks like, in our Q&A. Feel free to keep dropping them. We've still got plenty of time here. Utilize this time. It's for you and for you to learn and all the above. So one of the questions that we have here, similar to RDS, looking to do some experience against AWS Elastic Cache, is there any documentation, or can we use some if we can use the same approach of RDS? I guess that would be a good question. If I worded that incorrectly, my apologies.
Yeah, so you can, for the most part, you can do the same type of thing. So RDS and that blog post that we kind of referred to isn't necessarily specific to RDS. It's really any managed service by any cloud provider. So, with those type of environments, you're limited on what you can do because you don't control the infrastructure. You don't control the underlying host. You don't have any control over that. So you're really limited to testing that from a dependency point of view. So, how are you connecting to Elastic Cache? What happens if there's latency there? What happens if you can't connect to your Elastic Cache? So a lot of the same type of tests will apply to Elastic Cache as well. I don't know if we have a specific article on that. That RDS one's probably a good place to start. But I have worked with several customers doing that, so definitely happy to kind of deep dive into that outside of this if needed.
I can chip in on that. I think what you're trying to attack or block is almost irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but the way we use Gremlin is you just give it the port, essentially. If you're looking to block something, it's that easy. You don't have to worry about what it's called. As long as it's within your infrastructure, you know what port you're connecting to from A to B, you just put the number in. It's really that simple to get started. It's almost foolproof, I want to say. And we've done that for Kafka, Rabbit, MySQL, RDS, lots of different things. Different ports. You can do all of them. You can be specific and just do the database while keeping others, or you can remote local. If you've got the KO pods there, it's reading all the metadata. So as good as your metadata is, the better your experience of Gremlin would be from what I've done. The tagging that the providers things useful, the advanced options, there's even more. You can be really specific about what you attack as long as you know where it is. And that's my kind of experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of the screen that Chris was referring to. So in experiments, you can really define this as granular and specific as you want. So, under a black hole or latency type of an experiment, you can, specify, IP addresses, host names, source, destination ports, all that kind of good stuff. So it gives you the ability to really, regardless of, if it's an Elastic Cache, if it's RDS, if it's, Chris mentioned Kafka, RabbitMQ, all of those things, those can all be done just by targeting the ports or the IP address or the host name. And the flip side of that is, if you want to impact some things but not others, you can, exclude those from this experiment as well. So you can, basically whitelist these where we won't impact traffic. So very granular on how you set this up and how you can configure this. I pulled this up real quick while Chris was talking on that.
Okay, great. We've got another question here. Can these RM tests be incorporated into CI/CD?
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's what.
Chris, you want to maybe talk about how you did this, or?
Yeah, bend Gremlin to your needs, right? It's custom, but all we've really done is wrote API calls. So our Jenkins pipeline, our build test run is running. Our load gen tool with load, but it's also periodically calling the services, the Gremlin API, and that just runs, and we don't really care about that much. It's just post kill requests. It's fairly simple. The documentation's there. There is an example in Git, I believe, I've seen on the Gremlin site. We kind of taken that and made it a bit more verbose. It's there for you to manipulate, right? That's all I can say. I think the tools are relevant. You could do it in Postman with a Postman run job if you wanted to. It's that simple. It's not too complicated.
Great. So we've still got a little bit more time. I'm going to possibly give a little bit more time for any more questions that we have. But on top of that, I kind of wanted to go around and have maybe each of you talk about like your two biggest, like, I don't want to say challenges, but what was the greatest learning curve, learning experience that came from this, doing all of this together? And I think that would kind of give us a good opportunity to close out. If we have more questions, of course. Oh, we do have one right here. Hold on. Okay, so do we have manually prepared scenarios and experience before CI/CD implementation? That's a great question.
So no, you don't have to manually prepare these. So if you add your service to Gremlin, right, by default you'll get this Gremlin recommended test suite. So yes, this is using scenarios under the hood. So those tests and scenarios are automatically predefined for you using the Gremlin set of tests. So the zone and host failure, memory, CPU, and the 3 different tests for dependencies. So this is the default that you will get. So as soon as you add the service, we fill in that target information. So all those tests we ran against your front-end service or your cart service, or whatever your service is named inside of Gremlin. And so you can call those right off the bat, and as long as you have your health check defined and all that good stuff, we'll run those I guess recommended tests. But to Chris's point, and where they ended up is, some of those tests may be false positives, may not be completely applicable to your environment. That's where it gets into being able to really customize this to fit your needs. So you can absolutely start with the recommended tests. That's what Chris and the team did, was kind of start with the recommended tests, see how it works, how it fits into your environment, and then you can start modifying it afterwards. So the time to start is relatively short. But then you can really dig into it and make it, to Chris's point, bend it to your will, right? I mean, you can modify this pretty much as you want to get the benefit that you need.
And then the kill request is, we don't specify anything about the test. We call the service reliability API with the ID, and that's it.
Yep.
It's fairly straightforward. But the manual setup side, yes, but those tests we supply across every service, right? So it applies. That's what we did. We went full, modified it, run it again, modified it, run it again.
Yeah, so we've got a few more minutes. I was thinking maybe each of you, Andre, if you want to chime in also, kind of give us like some closing insights. I'd love to get some closing insights from each of you, like what really drove to the success to where you're at today, from where all of this initially started with the partnership. Yeah, that would be great. Everybody can kind of give some closing insights, and then we'll go ahead and close today's session. And if anybody has any other questions, everybody's LinkedIn is available in the handout section, and there's some great handouts as well.
Yeah, so honestly, I'd probably turn it over to Dan and Chris, because they've been working a lot more closely on this than I have. So yeah, definitely Dan, Chris, if you have anything to say, feel free to jump in, and I can add my 2 cents after.
For me, it wasn't just us that did it. We couldn't have done it without Gremlin being, having a relationship with us, talking back and forth, listening to my complaints or suggestions, telling me this is silly, you're doing it wrong. Without that relationship with Gremlin, and talking to them and working with them for so long, that's how we've also got to the place we are, because we've had that relationship, close working relationship, weekly catch-ups, raising problems which probably aren't problems, it's our problem, those kind of scenarios. And without that relationship, it would have been a struggle. I think we had the feedback quick. We were able to adopt a change or make a change and roll it out quicker, or even if it's just to understand something. Like, why is this score this when I don't agree with you? And then we had that conversation. I didn't have to wait or dig around. I got answers quickly. Without that, we wouldn't have excelled as quickly as we have. And that's been core to our journey, is our relationship with Gremlin. And that's it from me.
Yeah, and from the Gremlin side, I think it's just as important to have that relationship with the customer, right? I mean, having somebody like Chris that really understands, is willing to dig in and kind of evangelize and take this internally is huge. But that's one of the things that I've worked for a few different tech companies over past lives. That's one thing that's a little bit different about Gremlin is we really do try to treat each customer as a partnership. So Chris and I have a very, very long and sometimes colorful chat history on Slack. Um, but it's definitely a partnership. We talk about all kinds of good stuff, but we also get a lot of work done, and we do it very quick and are able to really make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. But having that champion that's really involved from the customer side makes our job a lot easier and a lot more fun as well.
Yeah. So another thing to add is in that reliability scoring suite, I forgot to mention, we have a service to test the suite and to test Gremlin and check Gremlin is okay. So we're testing Gremlin as much as they're testing us. So we've got a service, a mock service, which goes through that reliability scoring. If we update Gremlin, we control the versions of it. So we update it, we run the suite again. Does it give us 100%? Yes. If it doesn't, Dan, you've got a problem. Or we've got a problem our end up. I'm going to blame Dan. So it goes, we've got that. That was quite important to our journey, is making sure our scores are reliable. Making sure the reliability testing tool is reliable was one thing. But yeah, that was something which we set up, which was great. And also without it, we probably would have missed things or told people wrong, given them wrong information.
Yeah, absolutely. Andre, I saw that you've been sharing some great resources. I see that you've got like a Gremlin office hours. If you want to share like a little bit about that for us before we close that out, I think that's a really cool resource, especially on a topic like this. You want to share a little bit about that for us, and then we'll go ahead and close this out.
Yeah, definitely. So like Amanda mentioned, we have our office hours, which is a monthly series that we have. And what it's meant to do is to cover different parts of the Gremlin product that people might not be aware of, including our own customers, just because Gremlin can be a little daunting for new folks. It's hard to figure out exactly where to go to find, I won't say it's hard to figure out where to go, but it's just, there are areas of the product that you might not be aware of. And so this is designed to help kind of uncover some of those. So the one that we're hosting next month is going to be on failure flags. That's that application level fault injection. We'll be showing you how to use it, what it can be used for, like the various use cases, things like that. But we also have a history of past office hours. So if you want to learn more about reliability on AWS, or if you want to learn more about 5 tests you should be running if you're migrating to the cloud, we have one on AWS managed services. So the folks who asked about like RDS and Elasticache, that might be a really good one for you. We just started these this year, so our library isn't completely filled out, but we're adding more every single month. So, and these are all available for free. Just go to gremlin.com/office hours and find the one that interests you and check them out.
That is wonderful. Yeah. And we'll provide with the on-demand link. I'll also upload your YouTube that you shared. So thank you for doing that. That'd be really cool. You can also explore their product there. And thank you so much to Gremlin for sponsoring. We have some great handouts. Don't forget to download those. And without further ado, just a reminder before we close out, we invite you to please take our survey on today's session. We want to get the feedback from you. We want to hear about how you felt about this topic, and especially about talking with the team at Gremlin, and then Chris as well with Visa. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. And then also, just a reminder, this session is being recorded, and it will be available afterward on demand. We'll send you a link to your inbox for you to have access to the on-demand link. And without further ado, and we'll close out today's session. Thank you so much to our panel, Andre, Dan, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. This was insightful for sure. And that is it for us today. And thank you so much for joining this TechStrong learning experience. We hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks all.